Nephilim, seed of Adam, Lucifer, fallen angels, Anunnaki, archons, Sumerian gods, prophecy, birth. Dr. Brooks Agnew, latest leak project. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and tonight's guest is Dr. Brooks Agnew, host of X2 Broadcasting, now in its 12th year of production. If you go to x2-radio.com, his work has been featured on the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, also on Coast to Coast AM. Heralded by millions around the world as the modern-day John Galt, we are going to dive deep into his new production, Birth. 2 Earths and 1 race for time. Who are the agents of the Nephilim? What is the creation and destiny of our Earth? Who are these enormous empires moving mammoth amounts of power and wealth for themselves? Who are the 5 races of beings talked about in Genesis? Is there really 2 families fighting for control of the world? And are they the seeds of Lucifer and Adam? Make sure to subscribe to Dr. Brooks Agnew's YouTube channel and listen to his cutting-edge talk radio at www.x2-radio.com. Dr. Brooks Agnew, it's an honor to speak with you here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Oh, wow. It's the same here, an honor. Oh, it's great. I mean, yeah, Charlotte's been rocking and rolling, for several years now. And this is the first time I've ever written 3 books in 1 year. So I got to tell you, it is quite the project. I just could not lay it down.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, obviously, to put that much work together in that short amount of time is nothing short of extraordinary, but the actual material itself is phenomenal. I mean, if somebody goes to your YouTube channel and just listens to the trailer of Birth, they're automatically going to be hooked. I mean, there's just so much intense data in there that, let's get into that. I mean, why did you start writing these books? What happened? Was there something that just clicked one day and you said, yeah, I need to put this together?
Well, actually, my co-author, E.J. Clark, and I wrote a series of books starting in 2004, and I think we finished the last one in 2011. And it was 2,000 pages over 4 books about the origin and destiny of the Earth. And we covered a lot of the ancient civilizations, what they thought about the Earth, where they thought the Earth came from, what they thought the purpose of the Earth was, and how it was tied into humans, and what it was going to happen to it at the end times. And it was such a fascinating story. And I think in the 3rd volume of it, I had spoken about it on Coast to Coast with George Norrie, and the interview was over, which is about 5 o'clock in the morning for me. And about 8 in the morning, I get this phone call from a director in Florida. And he says, hey, I just listened to your interview on Coast to Coast tonight, and I think you should write a screenplay for that. Well, I didn't know a screenplay from a lump of coal, so I told him that, and he said, well, listen, buy a piece of software called Final Draft, learn how to use it, and write a screenplay. So I did, and it took me most of the year of 2011 to do that, and I sent it to him. And he sent back a note saying, congratulations, you just wrote a big screen movie. Well, I was all, excited. I was, hey, this is great. But then nothing happened. We didn't raise any money. We didn't find any movie stars. I mean, it's very difficult to pitch a screenplay, as it turns out. So it sat there, kind of unattended from 2012 to 2016 in January. And then what I decided to do was sit down and say, well, I'm not going to let it sit here as a screenplay unnoticed by anybody. I'm going to turn it into a book. So I started writing. Well, that first book made the publisher in February, like a month and a half. It was done. Went on Coast to Coast, bam, it went right up the charts on Amazon. And I told him, yeah, I'll probably finish the second book around Christmas time. That second book was on the shelf in June. So I just stayed with it. And now I'm almost finished with the 3rd volume. And it has turned into such an amazing, deep, powerful like action adventure story. It is fiction in that I use fictional characters, but everything in it is true. All the events, all the catastrophes, all the criminals, they're all real. They're all, and I use their real names. It's really something.
All right, that's a lot of info, and if you can make it exciting for somebody, then it's going to be a lot more palatable for them to make it through. Now, if we could get into some of this stuff, I mean, this is just so much data here. You talk about the agents of the Nephilim. Who are the agents of the Nephilim?
That's a very good question. I've read a lot of books, and sometimes the Nephilim are mentioned. But when we did the Ark of Millions of Years, our investigations found there are actually several layers of the Nephilim. There are the fallen angels Nephilim, which are these immortal beings with immense skills and abilities who tempt and teach mankind how to do all the things they're not supposed to do, like weapons and warfare and alchemy, all this kind of stuff. And as it turns out in history, they actually went to war with men along their side fighting, and many of them were lost during that period of time. And what they learned in very short order is that there were about 200 of them, and very short amount of time there was about 200 million of us. So it was easier for them after those wars to work from behind the scenes. Unfortunately, when we go to the big screen, this falls out into things like the Force, the dark side, and the light side. You have the Sith Lords, you have witches and warlocks. You don't really have the Nephilim. You have types and shadows of them. So in this book, I decided at the end of the first volume, you sort of are introduced to this Nephilim whose name is Semyaza. He's right out of the book of Genesis. You're just introduced to him just briefly, sort of like Thanos is introduced to you at the very end of one of the Marvel comic movies with the Iron Man. And then in the second book, the Nephilim takes a much more active role because the books are written in third person, so you can actually go to where the Nephilim is in the bottom of Cheyenne Mountain running things and manipulating things. And the general that works with him, through their conversation, the reader learns about their creation of most of the religions of mankind and how the first thing he did after he formed the religion is instruct that religion to hate and condemn all other religions. And then they did it again and again and again and again. And they kept mankind at war for millennia, fighting each other over different beliefs in God. And then they got into money. They started manipulating money, and they invented the forms of alchemy, moving men away from gold and silver to play money like paper or ones and zeros. And then they began manipulating that. And over a period of time, they were able to plunge every single nation on earth so deep in debt that they could not move. So all of the things that are happening around us right now, the way our elections playing out, the way we see our press being manipulated from deep, dark dungeons of coordination, it's all being done by the Nephilim. And I name them and I show them in the book, and I think it's going to be the first really big screen idea that actually brings the Nephilim right to the people's faces.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, the Nephilim, are they the Anunnaki? Is it all in the same? Potato, potato.
No. What the Nephilim did when they got here is, of course, they began, breeding with women, and then they had offspring, which were also some of the tribes called Nephilim. And then they, further generations, they had different tribes of giants. Some of them were sterile because they were too much of a hybrid, and others could reproduce, and we still have those giantess genes in floating through our DNA here and there around the planet. But for all intents and purposes, the Nephilim kind of get lost in the history and the mythology with the Titans and the gods, but every single tradition from the Maya, the Incas, the Olmecs, the Babylonians. Every single ancient race has a depiction of these Nephilim in their lore.
I've also seen different images and sculptures of just some very strange looking creatures, like the Sumerian gods, the Egyptian gods, even the Greek gods in the pantheos. Is there any validity to what they actually look like in some of those, ancient Sumerian tablets and the giant reptilian beings as well, or is that more metaphorical?
Well, of course, modern people say, oh, there's no such thing as a guy with a dog's head or a bird's beak or any of that kind of stuff. These are all types. These are all myths. They're motifs. They're icons. But when you consider the DNA of an off-worlder that's able to blend with the DNA of virtually any animal, then some of these abominations could possibly have come about. It's not that impossible. I was talking to a anthropologist one time, and he was examining a very small being. It was about 3 feet tall, had a really small neck, about the size of my wrist. And he said, well, it's obvious that this being could not talk. So it probably had to exist by sign language. And I said, why would you say it couldn't talk? He said, well, its throat is too small. Look at the nasal cavity. There's just no way this being could talk. And I said, mynah birds can talk. They don't have much of a throat. They don't even have lips, but they can sure talk. He said, you're right. And he rethought that. So these kinds of abominations could have existed because now we realize that there's enmity between the different gene classes. You can't take two unlike animals and mate them and get an offspring. I mean, you can take a Ginny and a Jack and get a mule, but you can't take a horse and a dog. You can't take a pig and a bull. It just will not crossbreed. But when you talk about the Nephilim DNA, the original Nephilim DNA, they could crossbreed with everything. And so these abominations were probably a possibility.
And so the Nephilim, there's good and bad factions.
There are. In the beginning, according to the mission that I've been able to discern from different writings, not just the Book of Enoch, but also the Zohar and the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the oldest book in the Kabbalah. Their original mission was to come here and kind of watch over early man as they were coming along, help them with things like teach them how to grow corn and how to, breed flowers to make sure that they had crops from year to year, those kinds of things. But, angels are peculiar beings in the sense that they're not supposed to have free will. They're supposed to just follow orders, use their skills and their judgment to accomplish the mission that they've been given. They're not supposed to use free will. So when these angels began to exercise their free will, especially with women, then they fell. They were cast out. They were cast permanently into the third dimension. So they're here with us. Now, I'm not saying they're going to come walking out, in Times Square and go to war with us. I don't think they would survive. But they could be in the castles, in the tunnels, in the mountains, in the dungeons of the great leaders of the world, teaching them way advanced principles of management and mathematics and manipulation so that they can become very powerful and follow their greed to its end.
What do they look like?
Well, there are a lot of different shapes of them. I went to Rosslyn Chapel, which is it's in Scotland. If you go to Edinburgh and go straight west, you run into this little tiny town of Rosslyn, and in Rosslyn is the chapel. If you go into the chapel and you're careful, You can go around the outside wall because you remember this was originally designed and built by John, so the legend goes. I'm talking about John the Beloved. There's also a well there and all kinds of other things that he's responsible for. In the walls are carved depictions of all of these different beings, and a lot of them have weird shapes. They have like long arms and fur, but a human face. Some of them have wings. Some of them have kind of bare feet with claws. So all kinds of different genetic expressions, shall I say. But they're all highly intelligent, very ancient beings. And it even has a depiction of Semyaza tied up with a rope and turned upside down, indicating that he was cast to earth. So it's pretty interesting. If you go and research it, they're almost all there, carved in the walls of Rosslyn Chapel.
Oh, I didn't even know that. If you were to say, let's go back to the 5 different beings that you talked about in Genesis. What are
Sure.
those 5 different beings?
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy. First of all, you have Adam, who was built out of the earth itself, and then, but he's built by God, who's not from this earth. He comes not from this earth to this earth and makes Adam and puts him on the earth. And then you have Eve, which is made from his rib. It's not that difficult for us to do that today. If we wanted to, we take the mitochondrial DNA from the marrow of a bone of a male, grab the female DNA, and make a compatible being with that male. We've done it with animals. But that being said, that's just, a zygote. Then you have to implant that in a womb, let it come to term, deliver it, raise her, and then bring her to earth. So there's another being that's not from this world, Adam or Eve. And then, of course, you have God. Then you have Lucifer, that's 4. And then you have the Nephilim, before you get out of Genesis 6, that's 5. None of these beings are from here.
Now, is Lucifer a Nephilim?
No. Lucifer's a different class of being. Lucifer is from one of the oldest creations. His original name was the Light Bringer, and he was integrally involved in almost all of the creation scenarios. Anytime you go to a church and you learn their initial deep doctrine, I don't care if it's in Africa or if it's Eskimos, you're taught the creation story. Lucifer was involved in all of that. So when it came time to form man in the image of God, it was a different project because there were lots of beings in the universe, but none created in the image of God, none with a pathway like his. In other words, if God's going to have offspring, he's going to have offspring like him. And so what happened was they had to choose someone to be sort of the Lord of that world. Lucifer assumed it would be him because he was one of the oldest, most glorious, most intelligent beings in the universe. But he was passed over. It went instead to Jesus. So this is a classic story. It's told in the Popol Vuh. It's told in just about every ancient story that you can think of, where you have 2 boys, one older, one younger, one more glorious and one humble. And it's always the humble one or the second born that gets the inheritance, whether we're talking Esau and Jacob or whatever. And the older son always becomes driven into a jealous rage about the younger son that got his inheritance. And they fight. They fight forever. They never give up because they want that inheritance. And so that's who Lucifer was. So when Lucifer came to this world, he came during the day or the period of time when God had left the earth. Adam was here for a long time, maybe 10,000 years. He was naming the animals. He lived on this garden planet, which we can call Eden if you like. And at the end of that period, before even the next day, then they bring him Eve. Adam receives all kinds of commandments, instructions, teachings over through this time, but Eve doesn't receive any of that. She's brought here, and then Adam teaches her. So then they separate because they're not driven by anything. They haven't been given any instructions to copulate or multiply and replenish the earth or anything. They're separate beings on this garden planet of Eden. Lucifer comes during that time in physical form. But first he goes to Adam. And Adam, of course, is this ancient being who's been now breathed into the life of this body that God made. And he says, well, hello, my old friend. And of course, Adam doesn't know him from Adam, right? His memory's been wiped away. He's a fresh new being having a new life. And so basically Lucifer tries to tempt him to partake of the tree of good and evil. And Adam tells him to take a hike. Sorry, I received commandments from the big guy. I'm not doing it. Long story short, Lucifer goes looking for Eve. Now, it's unknown how long it takes him to find her. It could be a month, it could be 100 years, but he finally finds her. Now, Eve is a different being. Eve's soul comes through the tree of souls. That's well described in Christian doctrine. The guff. It's a connection between where the souls await to get immortal life and to where they're connected to the fetus and born, with a belly button and all of that process. Eve is a different class of being. Eve is on the pathway and is the mother of all living because she is the matriarch of that pathway. Long story short, Lucifer beguiles her and impregnates her. And of course, she is fallen. She is undone. She is in so much pain and so much guilt that she goes running to Adam and explains to him what happened. Well, he could just say, too bad, so sad, you're going to be gone. God will just bring me another woman. But he didn't do that. He loved Eve so much that he said, if you go, I go. Show me how to partake. And she became pregnant again, and the twins were inside of her. And she gave birth to Cain and Abel. Cain is the seed of Lucifer. Abel is the seed of Adam. Lucifer convinces Cain to kill Abel, thus preserving his seed. And of course, Eve has many more children after that. But the story is that's how the seed of Lucifer came to be on this earth. That's how the spirits that followed him out of heaven after the war in heaven reach this planet. And they're here, and they're alive, and they're born evil, and they're evil their entire lives, and all they can think about is death and domination and the joy it gives them to inflict pain on another person.
Now, there's obviously different versions of those ancient stories, and I've heard a lot lately about the Anunnaki and their influence, and I've also been reading heavily into the Nag Hammadi treaties. I first read through it about 5 years ago, started researching the archons, and if you read through the secret book of John, it even has this one area where it talks about how demons were a part of making man, essentially, and there was a different one for every day of the year. It broke down into 365. Is very symbolic. But it seems like if you read through some of those Nag Hammadi treaties, the actual scriptures themselves are a lot less tainted and rewritten than some of the other Abrahamic texts. Now, I'm not saying one's more accurate than the other. I'm certain. I look at it as an agnostic and neutral approach, just to get the most information. But I certainly appreciate what you're bringing to the table, and I'm wondering, if that's the case, you're saying that everybody that's from that bloodline essentially is evil?
Everyone that's from that bloodline or has enough of that DNA in their bloodline makes a biological place for one of those evil souls to come to this world. And they've been born here many, many times. Now, I don't want to leave out the other race of man that you just brought up, because before Eden ever came here, millennia before that, there were other races on this planet. And the Nephilim worked with them too, taught them how to war. And there was no end to their waste or their weapons race, their arms race. They fought for so long, and their weapons became so powerful that they were actually able to split the ocean floor open and sink entire continents. And the weapons that fired the other way were so powerful that when we dug up the towns that were destroyed, one is in Harappa, the bones of those people laying in the streets that were killed in the blast are still, after 25,000 years, more radioactive than the bones at Hiroshima. That was long before Adam and Eve.
What country is that in?
Harappa?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember now. I don't know if it's Iraq or if it's I have to look it up now.
But it's in the Middle East.
I know the name of the town. Yeah, it's in the Middle East.
And 25,000-year-old bones that are more radioactive. I had never heard that before. That's incredible.
You can look it up. We have pictures of the bones of the people laying in the streets, families on the run. They died on the run holding hands, and they were just killed. And then the ash covered them. And it was not volcanic, because if it was volcanic, it would have been like Pompeii or some of the other volcanic cities or mudslide cities that we've uncovered in the past. These were killed in a nuclear blast.
Now, what about the Anunnaki? Where do the Anunnaki fit into this?
I don't fit the Anunnaki in. You know, I'm very close friends with John Gress, who wrote the movie One Anunnaki. And he was a Sitchinite for a long time, and we had a lot of discussions. And over the years, we were able to just about take apart everything that Zecharia Sitchin had proclaimed. It doesn't mean that there weren't, Enlil and those individuals didn't exist, but there was no NIBIRU. There was no off-worlder that came here and manipulated the genes of man to make them into gold miners, like the movie Battlefield Earth. That never happened.
So if you were to go back, let's say 30,000 years, then people would be very similar to now.
Sort of. Physically, they would be very similar to us as far as bipedal, two eyes, have a language, those kinds of things. And we're not talking just 30,000 years. You can go back 500,000 years. You can go back 5 million years and find evidence of advanced races here on this planet. Zenith after zenith after zenith, they were wiped out. But they were not created in the image of God. They did not have souls like we have souls.
Now, I've also heard of the deserts in the Middle East or India or somewhere in that area that are like glass, essentially. So that could kind of correlate with what you're talking about with the nuclear
It's
stuff.
in Egypt. It's in Egypt. It's about I almost made it there, but my last trip to Egypt, it was a little sketchy. We left the day before the Arab Spring. We just didn't feel comfortable going out that far out of Cairo with just a taxi driver to see this green glass, on the sand, which we knew was out there. They could take us out. There was about 80 miles outside of Cairo. It was just too dangerous. So we just canceled that expedition. We left, and I think that was on a Tuesday, and I think it was Thursday the Arab Spring broke out. In fact, 2 or 3 of the people that were with us on that trip stayed, and they got caught in it. They were safe, and I have to tell you, they told a completely different story than what the press was saying, but it was still too dangerous for me.
Oh, I can certainly understand that. Must have been neat to have been out there and then got out just kind of in the nick of time.
I don't think we would have ever got back. I think we would have been stuck out there, and we probably stayed in one of the small villages out there for a few months. But as long as the Muslim Brotherhood controlled the airport and controlled the taxis and the police, there was no way we were going back to Cairo.
Often looked at them at, the fallen angels as people just from another planet. That's, one of the hypotheses that has gone through my mind. But are you saying they're not extraterrestrials? Are they
They are.
spirits?
No, they are extraterrestrials, but they are physical beings from a much older creation. And, they have long lifespans, 35, maybe 50,000 years, depending on what world they're on. But they were cast out because they got involved in the war that happened before the planet Eden was ever created. There was a plan for what they were going to do with Eden. And that's where this whole jealousy thing broke out with Lucifer. Lucifer tried to get a lot of the host of heaven to go with him. And although he's a very convincing being, he only got a third of them to go with him. And they fought. I don't know how they fought in that realm, but they fought. And who knows how long they fought. Maybe it was a million years. I don't know. But they were eventually cast out. And the Nephilim were involved in that. So they were sent to this world to watch over man as angels, and they exercised their free agency and their free will, and that made them fall.
I understand. I'd be just fascinated to know more about when you talk about in the birth trailer these global players that are doing some of these just monstrosities to the earth and how they're taking all these resources and moving it from point A to point B. You do certainly see a lot of movement with the underground bunker systems that are being set up. And now even President Obama signed an executive order for this space weather prevention protections. They've got literally 6 months to come up with a whole bunch of new solutions to protect the satellites and a lot of the stuff that's in space, which is a great idea. You could have one solar flare that could wipe out half the satellite. So I am very agnostic to Planet X. I am totally neutral, and I've often thought before it was used as a psyop about every 4 years to cause this wag the dog scenario. They've been talking since the early 1900s that they found Planet X. And yeah, I'm sure there's a Planet X somewhere, but do I think that it's going to cause the poles to shift every 3,600 years? No, I don't. I'm very agnostic on that. But I do interview a lot of very intelligent people that are convinced Planet X is real, and I appreciate their opinions, and I look at the data they bring to the table. So but with that said, there's certainly some weird things going on with the Earth right now, the underground bunkers, the chemical trails that are geoengineering the planet. I've seen an increase in radiation, about 50%, a consistent increase. I've got a really nice Geiger counter built into my watch, actually, and I track these things, and they've gone up. It's not high. It's still at around 0.11, 0.12 microsieverts per hour, which is pretty low, but it used to never go above 0.08, and now it's never there. So, and this is a consistent increase. So what's up with all these weird earth changes and stuff? Are we getting close to some pretty serious catastrophes, World War III possibly? Is that the reason for these underground bunkers, etc.?
Well, I think you cover a lot of ground there. So let me cover the Planet X thing first. I did say that there was no such thing as NIBIRU, that there was no, race that jumped from NIBIRU to Earth to cause us problems every 3,600 years when this planet came around. But I didn't say there wasn't a Planet X. Now, my associates at JPL are all, graduated from there and retired from there. But one of the common threads that we've always realized is that all the orbits of the planets around our sun are pretty much on one side of the plane, which means that our sun should be pretty seriously wobbling as the planets go around that sun, but it's not. And what that means, and what NASA agrees to, and the guys at JPL agree to, is that there has to be a balancing gravitational body on the other side of the sun. Now, it doesn't have the same period as Pluto or even Jupiter. It probably has a period of somewhere around 20,000 years, but it has the sun stabilized somehow. And the other thing we realize is that our sun is actually a binary star. Now, it's separated by a long distance, which we didn't understand at first. But it's a binary star with the pair of stars that make up what we see as Sirius. Sirius is in the same place in our sky that it was 11,000 years ago. It hasn't moved, which means our sun's revolving around that sun. It's exactly the same, even though all of the signs of the zodiac move through the precessions every 26,000 years. That star doesn't. It stays in the same spot. So there probably is a Planet X. That being said, the forces that are working on the moons around Saturn and on our planet are causing some kind of climate change. We're beginning to see the oceans of several moons that are under the crust. Now, these are hollow moons. I know, hollow planets, right? Who would have thought such a thing? Anyway,
Hello.
those oceans are very active. Sometimes they're geysering out into space, and they're liquid. They're not frozen, which means energy is being poured into our solar system from somewhere. Some of that idea is that we're very close to the galactic plane. Somewhere around the year 2012, we began to go through it. We'll probably be completely through it and on the other side by 2025, and then we'll start the oscillation again. But while we're in the galactic plane, we're in line with a plane of very intense energy that's put out by a supermassive spinning black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. That black hole is probably the light engine for the entire galaxy. That's how much energy it puts out. So we're probably being affected by that. Now, I do believe that the federal government, without our knowledge, and certainly without our permission, is trying to geoengineer the Earth. I think that they have laced particulates into the atmosphere to try to block infrared radiation. To some extent, they've been successful doing that. But the compounds that they put up there, barium, aluminum, they do block infrared radiation. But what they do is they put off ultraviolet photons. And that ultraviolet photons is responsible for a tremendous increase in skin cancer, not only in humans, but also in animals. We're seeing a lot of the mammals that live in the sea that come to the surface to breathe. They're washing up by the thousands with these intense UV burns, which come from these UV rays that are intensified down into the very few first centimeters of the seawater. And so their skin is not used to that. They're used to the regular UV that hits the water, from at sea level. But they're getting hit with 1,000 times that much, which is a result of these chemtrails. So I think there's a lot of that going on. Now, I'll be honest with you, this summer and up until like just today, I haven't seen a chemtrail here in North Carolina. Last year, we were covered with them. This year, we have our Carolina blue skies back. Jets go over, they leave a little short contrail, a half an inch long behind that plane. Well, I mean, it's a half an inch long when I hold my thumb up to it. But there's not these long billowing trails that last all day and haze out the afternoon like we've got last year. It's really remarkable to see the extent. Now, if the president comes out and says, climate change is the biggest threat we face, and the military goes to him and says, well, we have this new weapon to fight global warming. It's called chemtrails. I can guarantee you, I was in the Air Force, I can guarantee you if we have a weapon, we are going to use it.
Right. Well, and then with that said as well, I do remember back in 2013, I was in Colorado Springs in January, and the chemtrails were so bad out there that I even made a comment to a couple of my coworkers. We were taking a walk in the morning time. I had a pair of polarized sunglasses on, and I could just see the particulates falling from the skies. It was so heavy. And I made a comment, and one of my coworkers, she goes, "No way, really?" I go, "Yeah, put these on." And she put them on, and she looked, and she goes, "Oh my God, you're right." I said, "It's pretty intense, isn't it?" I mean, it was just so, even all throughout the Four Corners area, when I would stop at a national park and make comments about how foggy it was, people are like, "Yeah, we can't figure it out. We never seen it like this before. Maybe we saw those wildfires they got out there." I said, probably not the wildfires. But anyway, I mean, that's a whole other episode. So I can definitely see these things going on, and I'm wondering if it's nefarious purposes. Maybe they say they've got good agendas for it, and it seems like they're good at selling something at, disguised as a benefit, when in reality it's not. So, but let's talk about the two Earths and one race for time. I mean, do you literally mean two Earths?
Yeah. In the Arc of Millions of Years series, one of the discoveries that we made, it was very early on, I think in the second volume, was called the Union of the Polarity. Now, the Union of the Polarity was much more pronounced in the Mayan, Incan, Olmec, Zapotec, in that region, and in Egypt than it was anywhere else that we looked on Earth. But the idea behind it is that Earth is actually made up of two parts. It has a physical part, a temporal part, which is lower vibrational matter, which the Sefer Yetzirah calls it temporal matter, and then spirit matter, or higher vibrational matter, that makes up the kind of soul of Earth. And most of these religions, whether we're talking about the original Popol Vuh, or we're talking about even the Book of Mormon, or let's see, I'm trying to think one of the books that we used out there, they talk about life force coming out of the earth, about a synergy, a symbiotic relationship that occurs between the human body and the body of the earth, that the earth can actually reject or accept races that are upon it, depending upon their behavior. Admittedly, there's a lot of, judgmental stuff that goes into this, but the idea was that when Adam and Eve, when Noah came here with his ship, that he brought the bones of Adam and Eve and on all of the souls that were preserved after the earth was destroyed in the flood, that was actually a planet called Eden, and the entire planet merged with this planet. And the cataclysm was so great that it took 7 months for the two planets to settle down and Noah's Ark to come to rest on Mount Ararat. And the idea was that over time, the two planets would become more and more synergistic, more harmonizing. But then, as time went on, they would become dissident to one another. They would begin to come apart. And somewhere around 2012, 2020, somewhere in there, the two planets would begin to come apart. The higher vibrational Earth would separate from the lower vibrational Earth, and all the beings that were alive on the Earth, depending on their vibrational status, if it was lower vibrational, like they were murderers and rapists and, bad people, they would stay with the lower Earth. And all those that were on a path of higher enlightenment or love, we'll call that a love frequency, then they'll go with the higher Earth. It is the epitome. It's the center line of the concept of the rapture, except that you're not taken up in the clouds while all the evil people are destroyed down on the earth and you get to watch. You go with the earth, and the earth actually returns through the dark rift in the Milky Way, which they call the cosmic vagina, and you go back down through that to where the earth was originally created, to where that earth was originally created. You go home. And so that's why this is called Two Earths for Time, because the book opens with a crew on board Deepwater Horizon. Now the movie just came out, so I'm going, holy crap! I was so timely with this movie. You can't believe it. here are these guys on the Deepwater Horizon, and one of the young guys, his name is Orfan Bayezid in the book, sees these two giant waves go past the horizon out there in the pre-dawn Gulf of Mexico. And as the waves pass, this giant drill rig lurches one way and then the other and then back again, and the drill pipe breaks. And that's what causes the explosion. Now, the one thing that we do know from factual evidence, because I went and investigated myself, I went to Mississippi for a year and investigated this. The owners of Deepwater Horizon did, in fact, move their money less than 30 days from when this occurred. Purchases were made, strategic purchases of rig fire prevention companies. Stock was moved. Insurance policies were doubled. What I found out was it was a tragedy, but it was not an accident. Several people very high up knew what was going to happen and when it was going to happen. And so I tied it into the book by saying the Nephilim know the timing of this stuff. And so they get their followers, they get their big money brokers, their big donors, as it were. They protect them and they guide them through these cataclysms so that they can profit from it.
That reminds me of the movie Knowing with Nicolas Cage.
Exactly.
The Gulf oil disaster is portrayed to a T in one of the scenes where he's sitting down on the couch. He's got the remote in his hand. No, it's actually a chair. He's sitting down in like a lazy boy chair. He's got the remote in his hand, and he's flipping through the channels. And the exact same day even is portrayed on the TV of 420, the event that same time that it took place. And not only is that in the movie, but also the same day of Fukushima is portrayed in that movie. And I've talked to people like Gano Grills, which has worked in Hollywood, and this guy even says there's people that are working with Hollywood that are off-world. Wow, that's incredible.
That's what I'm saying. The Nephilim know this stuff, and they prepare the population through 4 different methods. They use the media, they use litigation, they use legislation, and they use education. And they prepare and manipulate society to do what they want it to do.
So where are we going? I mean, what's going to happen here in the next 2 months, are you feeling?
I feel that programs like yours and mine, X Squared Radio, and others, that we have created around the world pockets of light, pockets of awareness, and that those people have not only awakened, but they've talked to people around them and awakened them. And slowly but surely, 2 things are occurring. First of all, the churches are losing membership right and left. Why? It's not because people don't want, to hear hymns. It's because they're searching for a spiritual resonation that they're not getting in church. I mean, the songs are great. It's a great social club. I like the overall general message. Different faiths have different, tunes to the same lyrics, shall we say. But people graduate from that. They reach a point where they need more, and they walk out of the church and they open their ears and they hear you, or they hear me, or they hear somebody else at Truth Frequency or Blog Talk or BBS, and they go, that's what makes sense. And so what's happening is these dark forces are losing their grip. They're losing their grip on the entire race. And I feel in the next 2 months, we are going to see a real revolution. And I don't mean take to the streets with pitchforks and guns and all that, but I mean a revolution of non-compliance. There's a movement going on. Excuse me. There's a movement going on right now in the United States that the pollsters, the press, as much as they're trying, and Lord knows they're trying, they can't figure it out. They can't get a hold on it. They can't understand why 30, 40, 50,000 people at a time are following Trump around, and he's still losing in the polls. They cannot figure it out. But I think we're very, very close to a revolution. It already happened in Britain. They already told the globalists, you guys go play your own game. This is our island. We're about to do the same thing with Washington, D.C. And I think you and me, we're responsible for that.
You know, I'm watching the TV series Designated Survivor, where I don't know if you've had a chance to even, have you seen any of the previews for that?
I've seen the previews, yeah.
Okay. And the reason I bring up a lot of these TV shows is because you can resonate sometimes if you have a chance to watch the film or the movie, you know the underlying theme, you can kind of resonate with what's going on. And when you watch that series, essentially what happens is there's a direct terrorist hit on a political speech, so virtually everybody's wiped out in politics, you know, in the cabinet. So one of the designated survivors is Kiefer Sutherland, and he's now the president. And it's interesting to kind of watch the subliminal messaging that they put in these TV shows. I've been really keen to that for the past 20 years, just breaking things down. And you can tell that with all these different shows that are coming out, like Mr. Robot as well, portraying that the financial collapse is imminent as far as this fiat currency system that we're using now. It's going to kind of go over to this new fiat currency like the Bitcoin. And, you know, if you really think about it, money is nothing more than, right now, than trust in the government, essentially. I mean,
it's how much, a promise to pay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's tangible in and of itself. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with fiat currency as long as you just, you know, the people at the very top levels and everybody involved is using it as a balanced approach. So regardless, I do see a change happening. People are waking up, like you said, and you've been doing this for 12 years. So, I mean, you've certainly put so much energy and effort into waking people up, unplugging people from this dark form of matrix. So I certainly I applaud you for that. I spoke to you 6 years ago when I was doing this just kind of as a co-host for another organization, helping them out. And you blew my mind 6 years ago. So I mean, it's great that our paths have connected again. And I appreciate you bringing this material to the table. You also present it in a way that's not boring. I mean, it's exciting to read. It's exciting to learn that way. And it would be nice if in the next couple of months we started to just say, hey, look, we're not going to assimilate. We're going to do our own thing. You don't tread on me. I won't tread on you. Wouldn't that be just the best law in the world? Get rid of all these other petty laws and ridiculous things. Don't tread on me, and I won't tread on you. It's easy.
Well, it's a little more complex than that, but you're right. In 2012, I wrote a book called Alienated Nation: The New Path to Liberty. And the book was nonfiction. It was in the areas of government and finance. And what it was designed to do was open the prospect of what's called an Article 5 convention. Now, this is a little bit different than a constitutional convention, which is kind of like Pandora's box. We don't want to do that.
Right.
We got George Soros and the House of Saud waiting in the wings to buy that one. Now, this one is run by the states, and what they do is they create amendments that they want to make to the Constitution. They approve them in a council. They open the convention, make the amendment, close the convention, and go through the ratification process. It takes 38 states to finish the ratification process, 34 states to open the convention. Well, at the writing of that book, there were 0. Now there are 26 states. We sent the book to every governor, all the state legislatures around the country. Another book was written the next year in 2013 by Mark Levin called The Liberty Amendments. His didn't make it to number 1. Mine did. Alienated Nation made it to number 1. It was my first number 1 book on Amazon. But the point is that people started listening. Mark Levin listened, and now they've got this organization called COS, which is conventionofstates.com. They've got regular webinars going on. They've held 2 planning meetings at Mount Vernon, which I think is pretty auspicious myself. And I think next year sometime, we're going to have 34 states, and they're going to go after the 3 areas that we outlined in the book. First and foremost is exactly, well, pretty much what you just said. We're going to take the agency government apart. That was set up in 1933 by Roosevelt, It has since grown from a couple of dozen agencies then to more than 655 agencies now. They write law, they pass taxes, they assess fees, they take police actions. They have seized almost 700 million acres of land of the West, and they have no authority to do this. So we're going to take the agency government apart. No more regulations that have the force of law. Writing a tax without representation by the people is tyranny. And so that part's going to come apart. The second part, we're going to address, try to balance out these powers a little bit here. We're going to address Congress, because Congress has an approval rating somewhere, it goes up and down, but it's somewhere around that of hemorrhoids. And I think
Classic.
what we're going to do to fix that is, you can't take the money out of politics, but you can take the election out of politics. So what we're going to do is change the term of a congressman from 2 years, which is a little ridiculous given our modern day. It was originally 2 years because Congress only met part-time, and it sometimes took 2 weeks for a congressman to get from his constituency to Washington, because he had to go by wagon or train or whatever. So it was a big burden to go back and forth. So we're going to change it to 4 years, and then we're going to limit it to 3 terms. So 12 years, you're in, you're out, you run for re-election twice. That's it. And we do the same thing with the Senate. We limit it to 3 terms, you're in 18 years, and you're gone. And that will undo the dynasties that have been set up in Congress that have made it the corrupt organization that it is. It will go back to being an organization of people instead of oligarchs. So that fixes the executive branch, it fixes the legislative branch, and then we go to work on the Supreme Court. There are some ways to check the Supreme Court from writing law, and the way to do that is with an amendment to the Constitution. It will just basically set the record once and for all, because the guidelines for the Supreme Court were pretty loosey-goosey anyway, and then when John Marshall became Chief Justice, he set up the writing law from the bench, which every other justice has followed since him, in Marshall versus Maybury, which is a really good case if you ever want to read it. But what this will do is it will set a guideline by amendment that the Supreme Court interprets law by the Constitution and not the other way around.
Yeah. And, I think that it's also great, too, that people are starting to do more off-the-grid type stuff. There's a really cool organization called myozarkhomestead.com, where essentially it's this grassroots organization out there in the Ozarks, and they're setting up these extremely efficient homesteads for people that just want to get off the grid. If there's like a solar flare and a bunch of satellites get offline, people go crazy in the streets. If there is a serious cataclysm somewhere, World War III happens, whatever, people that find a way to get off of the grid like that in a safe location and can sufficiently provide themselves food, water, electricity, they're going to have a much better chance to not only survive, but thrive in a community like that. So I think it's neat to see people looking for alternatives, and I love all this new technology that's coming out there that people are taking advantage of. How's it going with you and the electrical vehicles that you're working with? The electric vehicles?
Well, let me cover that in a second. I want to flesh out this thing you're talking about. Energy and the distribution of energy has shaped the world more than anything else. I mean, when the municipalities lay wires and then they say, you got to live along these wires. You can't live over there, where there's no wires. We determine where society grows because you got to pay us. What they've done is they've created Pandora's box. And in 2013, the National Energy or Electric Reliability Corporation, it's called the NERC. They're not a government agency, but they're a government contractor. Their job is to manage the grid of the United States. And by manage, I mean they match the phases of all the generators, all the dams and nuclear power stations and coal and gas-fired plants so that there's no problem with moving energy from, say, Duke Energy here around Charlotte to New York because all the phases are balanced. So, but in doing so, in creating this grid, the NERC realized that they had also created a vulnerability. 3 of them, in fact. One was to pandemic. If we have a really, really bad case of the flu and all the guys that know how to run this power station get it, somebody's got to be able to take control of this plant from a remote location and make it run, right? So that was one vulnerability. The second was natural disaster, like an earthquake, a tsunami, a solar flare, something like that. They had to be able to respond to that, especially if it was a regional problem. And the third one was physical attack or cyber attack. But before we had the grid, we didn't have a national exposure like that. Our energy districts were separated. Now they're all combined into one grid. So because they created this vulnerability, we put together a presentation and we went to Amsterdam because we were making it to the European grid as well as the US grid at the same time. And we proposed that they would take 1%, just 1% of the money that they were giving NERC to manage the grid to create what we call local low voltage solutions. In other words, instead of creating energy at 161,000 volts, putting it on aluminum lines, sending it out to 13.8 auto tap transformers, and then stepping that down to the transformer outside your house to power your meter, you power the meter directly at that house, at that building, at that police station, at that water treatment plant with a low voltage local source. And the technology's here. You just talked about it. So they were going to spend $200 million that year on working to control this grid, working to fix these vulnerabilities. We asked for 1%, which would have been $2 billion. So we asked for $2 billion to put into taking these prototypes and pushing them into production so that people could put them on their houses, not to replace the grid, but in case the grid goes down, they don't lose essential services. You don't have a hospital that goes dark. You don't have a water treatment plant that goes dark and sewage starts backing up. Things can power themselves indefinitely. Now, obviously, over time, what that would do is de-urbanize, just like you talked about. People would move out into the Ozarks, make a community, and they don't need a coal-fired plant because every single house has its own power supply that's renewable and free and clean. That technology exists today, but it can't get to market because there's no investment money for it. So that's what we're trying to carve out of the fund. And we were turned down, of course, but we made the proposal nonetheless. Now, electric vehicles. Wow, what a journey this has been. 10 years now, 10 years. In 2013, because supply chain for electric vehicles is so difficult to do, and everyone that's attempted this knows what I'm talking about, you cannot get the frame to start with from the major car makers. They're not going to give it to you. And you can't afford to buy a new car and strip it out and turn it into electric. I mean, you'll go broke. So we had to design our own frame from the ground up as an electric truck. And by the time we were done, it took us about a year, we had the lightest, fastest, only on-highway electric pickup truck in the world. It was 1,000 pounds lighter than a Ford Ranger, twice as fast, twice the payload, and about the same cost as a Chevy Silverado. Last year, we were 4 months through the airbag testing portion of that truck, and our airbag supplier got hit with an unprecedented federal sanction. That airbag supplier it was one of the biggest in the country, went all but belly up from that federal sanction. It took out every electric car maker in America, including Tesla.
You think that was by design?
Oh, hell yeah. We've been telling them for 10 years how to fix it, but they wouldn't do it. The DOT would not do it. They let it get so bad that people started getting hurt from it, and then they did the recall. At 23 million cars, nobody can afford to do that. I mean, their bonds are being stressed like you wouldn't believe. So they backed out of our airbag program. So we had to find another airbag supplier, and by the time we did that, the cost of getting the airbag quadrupled. So we had to go back to the capital markets and look for more money, and that's where we are right now. We're in mothballs looking for money, and I'm sitting here with 75,000 orders I can't fulfill.
75,000 orders for electric trucks that could revolutionize the world, and you can't do anything because of a silly airbag.
And Rex, I had to stop there. I could have had 200,000 orders, but I stopped the sales department from selling them.
Man, what could I do personally to help you out with this?
You know any high net worth individuals that want to make a lot of money, send them my way.
Man, I'll tell you, you certainly have so many different options, and you're doing so many things at once. I don't know how you do it, man. Definitely the contributions of John Galt are similar. This is great, man. Now I see why they reference you, and people often consider you the new John Galt.
Well, we have a lot of like-minded individuals we've taken under our wing, people that have created technologies that would never, ever have seen the light of day. That's what makes our truck so efficient. That's what makes it so light, so powerful. That's why our patents are, I mean, the examiners are sitting there with their jaws on the floor, but they passed them. So we're there, and we're untouchable. We're the only truck in the world, and nobody can get close to us for at least 2 or 3 years.
So if there was a way to get the thing taken care of, like safety issues and everything, airbags, if that could get taken care of in the next 6 months, it would still take a couple more years to do all this, I'm sure, because you've got to get everything else together?
No, all the safety stuff is done. We've already passed all our crash tests. All that's done. All we have to do now is put the 3 airbags in it, and which is basically a licensing process. It takes, between that and the electronic stability control braking, which are done simultaneously, it takes about 8 months to complete it. But once we contract, once we start sending cabs on the sled, programming the controller, which takes about 4.5 months, a lot of iterations. It's a slow process because you have to draw the bag, build the bag, pack the bag, launch it, photograph it, program, launch it again. It takes a lot of data to make sure that the bag's going to work perfect one time, but every time, one time. Anyway, it takes about 6 months to get that done. We can start taking orders and setting delivery dates once we're in the contracted process.
What if you did like a 3-wheel, set it up as you could classify it as a motorcycle?
Then we could sell trucks, but that's not the business I'm in.
Check out that new 3-wheeler. Yeah, I get you.
I could do it. I could sell them in India, but I'm not going to compete in a business where I'm going to make $200 on a truck. This is, I've been in the car business since the early 90s, manufacturing vehicles with the big 3, actually big 4 if you include Nissan, and I know how to do it, and I've done it a lot of times, millions of times. This is the business I'm in.
Have you reached out to Elon Musk? Is that a bad idea? Because I know
he's my competitor, not my colleague.
Gotcha. I didn't know if there was a way maybe you guys could join forces and do something together, but at the same time, I can certainly understand that.
Of course, there's a way that could happen, but it hasn't happened. I don't want to go into the details of that, but Elon Musk ended up with the Tesla Motors from my friends who founded Tesla Motors.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm not trying to put salt on a wound there. Jeez. Well, hey, you know what they say, man. I mean, the universe has a way of putting things together, and with all the good energy and stuff that you've put out there, certainly it's going to find its way back around for you. And
certainly,
with the airbag,
it's not random.
Yeah, with this airbag thing being pretty much the biggest factor right now, something could turn up, man. Maybe there's somebody else out there working on some new technology or something. Anybody that's listening to this presentation, if you'd like to know more about Dr. Brooks Agnew, if you want to listen to his radio shows, he's been doing this now for 12 years. x2-radio.com. That's X Squared Radio. Also on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to Brooks Agnew YouTube channel. And before we close out tonight, I know you're super busy and it's been a long day for you, so I'd like to say thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hey, that's no problem. And by the way, anybody that goes to Amazon and buys the Birth Trilogy, which the third book should be coming out here by the end of the month, and they send me the receipt, the instructions are inside the cover of the book. I will send you the audio version of the book for free. So if you're not a good reader, don't worry about it. I read it for you. And the audio book is for sale by itself at xsquaredradio.com.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, too, because Amazon seems to take a very large chunk. I think they take about 50%. So if there's a better way...
And they raise the price. And Amazon has a program called Audible, but if you want to spend $25 on an audiobook, go there. You can buy it from my site for $4.95.
Perfect. I'll take that opportunity. Well, right on, man. This has been fantastic. I certainly hope that things work out for you with the electric vehicles here and everything else. And if you ever get a chance to do that Center of the Earth expedition, that would be awesome.
I'd have to wait for the ice to break open again. It's refrozen. It's back to its 1981 levels, so there won't be any going that way for a while.
Well, yeah, we'll certainly appreciate everything, Dr. Brooks Agnew, and you have a fantastic day.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rex.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Nephilim, seed of Adam, Lucifer, fallen angels, Anunnaki, archons, Sumerian gods, prophecy, birth. Dr. Brooks Agnew, latest leak project. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and tonight's guest is Dr. Brooks Agnew, host of X2 Broadcasting, now in its 12th year of production. If you go to x2-radio.com, his work has been featured on the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, also on Coast to Coast AM. Heralded by millions around the world as the modern-day John Galt, we are going to dive deep into his new production, Birth. 2 Earths and 1 race for time. Who are the agents of the Nephilim? What is the creation and destiny of our Earth? Who are these enormous empires moving mammoth amounts of power and wealth for themselves? Who are the 5 races of beings talked about in Genesis? Is there really 2 families fighting for control of the world? And are they the seeds of Lucifer and Adam? Make sure to subscribe to Dr. Brooks Agnew's YouTube channel and listen to his cutting-edge talk radio at www.x2-radio.com. Dr. Brooks Agnew, it's an honor to speak with you here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Oh, wow. It's the same here, an honor. It's great. I mean, yeah, Charlotte's been rocking and rolling, for several years now. And this is the first time I've ever written 3 books in 1 year. So I got to tell you, it is quite as it turns out in history, they actually went to war with men along their side fighting. And many of them were lost during that period of time. And what they learned in very short order is that there were about 200 of them, and very short amount of time, there was about 200 million of us. So it was easier for them after those wars to work from behind the scenes. Unfortunately, when we go to the big screen, this falls out into things like the Force, the dark side and the light side. You have the Sith Lords, you have witches and warlocks. You don't really have the Nephilim. You have types and shadows of them. So in this book, I decided at the end of the first volume, you sort of are introduced to this Nephilim whose name is Semyaza. He's right out of the book of Genesis. You're just introduced to him just briefly, sort of like Thanos is introduced to you at the very end of one of the Marvel comic movies with the Iron Man. And then in the second book, the Nephilim takes a much more active role because the books are written in third person, so you can actually go to where the Nephilim is in the bottom of Cheyenne Mountain running things and manipulating things. And the general that works with him, through their conversation, the reader learns about their creation of most of the religions of mankind and how the first thing he did after he formed the religion is instruct that religion to hate and condemn all other religions. And then they did it again and again and again and again. And they kept mankind at war for millennia, fighting each other over different beliefs in God. And then they got into money and they started manipulating money and they invented the forms of alchemy, moving men away from gold and silver to play money like paper or ones and any money. We didn't find any movie stars. I mean, it's very difficult to pitch a screenplay, as it turns out. So it sat there kind of unattended from 2012 to 2016 in January. And then what I decided to do was sit down and say, well, I'm not going to let it sit here as a screenplay unnoticed by anybody. I'm going to turn it into a book. So I started writing. Well, that first book made the publisher in February, like a month and a half. It was done. Went on Coast to Coast, bam, it went right up the charts on Amazon. And I told him, yeah, I'll probably finish the second book around Christmas time. That second book was on the shelf in June. So I just stayed with it. And now I'm almost finished with the third volume. And it has turned into such an amazing, deep, powerful, like action adventure story. It is fiction in that I use fictional characters, but everything in it is true. All the events, all the catastrophes, all the criminals, they're all real. They're all, and I use their real names. It's really something.
That's a lot of info, and if you can make it exciting for somebody, then it's going to be a lot more palatable for them to make it through. Now, if we could get into some of this stuff, I mean, this is just so much data here. You talk about the agents of the Nephilim. Who are the agents of the Nephilim?
That's a very good question. I've read a lot of books, and sometimes the Nephilim are mentioned. But, when we did the Ark of Millions of Years, our investigations found there are actually several layers of the Nephilim. There are the fallen angels Nephilim, which are these immortal beings with immense skills and abilities who tempt and teach mankind how to do all the things they're not supposed to do, like weapons and warfare and alchemy, all this kind of stuff. And and then they began manipulating that. And over a period of time, they were able to plunge every single nation on earth so deep in debt that they could not move. So all of the things that are happening around us right now, the way our elections playing out, the way we see our press being manipulated from deep, dark dungeons of coordination, it's all being done by the Nephilim. And I name them and I show them in the book, and I think it's going to be the first, really big screen idea that actually brings the Nephilim right to the people's faces.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, the Nephilim, are they the Anunnaki? Is it all in the same? Potato, potato.
No. What the Nephilim did when they got here is, of course, they began, breeding with women. And then they had offspring, which were also some of the tribes called Nephilim. And then they, further generations, they had different tribes of giants. Some of them were sterile because they were too much of a hybrid, and others could reproduce. And we still have those giantess genes in, floating through our DNA here and there around the planet. But for all intents and purposes, the Nephilim kind of get lost in the history and the mythology with the Titans and the gods, and but every single tradition from the Maya, the Incas, the Olmecs, the Babylonians, every single ancient race has a depiction of these Nephilim in their lore.
I've also seen different images and sculptures of just some very strange looking creatures, like the Sumerian gods, the Egyptian gods, even the Greek gods.
Project, I just could not lay it down.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, obviously, to put that much work together in that short amount of time is nothing short of extraordinary, but the actual material itself is phenomenal. I mean, if somebody goes to your YouTube channel and just listens to the trailer of Birth, they're automatically going to be hooked. I mean, there's just so much intense data in there that let's get into that. I mean, why did you start writing these books? What happened? Was there something that just clicked one day and you said, yeah, I need to put this together?
Well, actually, my co-author, E.J. Clark, and I wrote a series of books starting in 2004, and I think we finished the last one in 2011. And it was 2,000 pages over 4 books about the origin and destiny of the Earth. And we covered a lot of the ancient civilizations, what they thought about the Earth, where they thought the Earth came from, what they thought the purpose of the Earth was, and how it was tied into humans, and what it was going to happen to it at the end times. And it was such a fascinating story. And I think in the 3rd volume of it, I had spoken about it on Coast to Coast with George Norrie, and the interview was over, which is about 5 o'clock in the morning for me. And about 8 in the morning, I get this phone call from a director in Florida. And he says, hey, I just listened to your interview on Coast to Coast tonight, and I think you should write a screenplay for that. Well, I didn't know a screenplay from a lump of coal, so I told him that, and he said, well, listen, buy a piece of software called Final Draft, learn how to use it, and write a screenplay. So I did, and it took me most of the year of 2011 to do that, and I sent it to him. And he sent back a note saying, congratulations, you just wrote a big screen movie. Well, I was all, excited. Hey, this is great. But then nothing happened. We didn't raise